Welcome back, everyone. Today we're back in Cedarburg and we're going to be working on some updates to our city, specifically around some of our residential zoning and how that's going to look moving forward as we begin to add suburbs into the city. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, be sure to hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Leave a like, drop a comment down below with any suggestions for future videos in Cedarburg. And don't forget, if you are interested in watching a live stream of Cities 2, I do stream over at Twitch at twitch.tv/slay3k. So the first order of business is actually redoing some of the city blocks that I set up in previous episodes. And if you've watched any of the previous episodes, you've probably heard me talk about the evolution and sort of growth of a city in Cities 2. It just seems different to me. It seems more focused on slowly taking areas of your town and, transforming them as you progress through your build. Last week, we talked a little bit about adding character to your city and doing things a little bit more deliberately and trying to set up different things within city blocks and stuff like that that make areas stand out. And that's something we're going to continue today with some of the designing I'm going to do with the layout of some of the roads and zoning and how some of that's all going to come together. And I think it'll start to shape the city and continue to give it character as we progress. So I'm going to take a few of these city blocks we've already set up, and I'm going to pay a little more attention to how I'm setting up some of these zones. As I continue to play Cities 2, I'm looking to find ways of incorporating certain zone sizes to sort of promote certain types of buildings or a certain look. Part of what we need to be doing downtown is also shaping this area to have progression from lower density buildings and houses into our taller buildings. With Cities 1, I talked a lot about creating that fade from your low to the ground buildings into your towers and stuff. So I want to try to do that the best I can in Cities 2, but we're just going to have to do that via zoning instead of plopping down buildings. So we'll have to pay close attention to some of the sizes. And this may be something we need to alter as we continue to progress through different areas of the build. So what I want to do is actually feature some of the row homes towards the cemetery. That'll be a little bit of a middle point in part of my downtown area. I'm also going to be using some pedestrian pathing to help separate it from some of the roads and make it feel like a little bit isolated, almost like a little mini neighborhood. And then the alleyway is actually meant to separate some of the commercial mixed use area that I'm setting up with some of the row homes. And we can't forget to add some parking lots in some of these spaces. I don't know that this necessarily helps with the not enough customers notification you may get on some of your commercial buildings. I had seen in one city that I was working on where it did seem to give a positive effect, like people were able to find parking and maybe get into some of the commercial stores. But I don't have any scientific proof as to whether that is actually something that is factored into that notification. Something you're going to see me do quite a bit in this episode alone is just taking away some of the crosswalks that are set up by adding some of these pedestrian paths or some of the alleyways. That way I'm trying to keep traffic flowing and not stopping quite as much, especially as this area gets more dense with more population. Adding some of these pedestrian paths near where parks are and a lot of pedestrian traffic is kind of nice because you'll see some of that traffic actually using the paths, and it helps give like some connective tissue from an aesthetic perspective when you start having some of these parks, integrated in with some of your residential with pedestrian paths and all that. So I'm going to draw out some of these paths, and then later I think we'll go back at some point and actually give this a little bit more detail utilizing some trees. So you can see one side is all row houses and the other side is a mix of row houses and some commercial. That way we're sort of establishing a little bit of the downtown because some of those buildings are going to be taller. Now, I may have to adjust some of that zoning size depending on the scale of those buildings as we sort of progress and continue to shape this area, but I'm hoping we'll get lucky, but I guess we'll see. And a lot of this low density residential in this area is probably going to be removed. We'll be focused on row houses, medium density, and then we'll start inserting some high density as we progress. And we're going to be mixing those zones up in a lot of spaces as well. They're not just going to be big old blocks like we've done to establish the city. As you can see here, I'm trying to mix this up. That way we get a little bit of variety in buildings and hopefully some different sizes, but I do want them to fit together pretty well. I spent some time recently off camera just trying to work at designing what the city should look like, and that's taken a little bit of patience and trying to play with some of the tools. Ultimately, it comes down to a lot of zoning sizes and mixing those things in to try to show progression in the city from, again, low density stuff into medium into high density. I'm trying to find some of that balance so that I can create stuff that looks sort of appropriate for what I'm looking for. This is where hopefully one day the mods will actually give us a little bit more control over that. Much like we had in Cities 1, even with just zoning or growable items, we were able to do a little bit with mods to control some of that. And ultimately, I know that's not how everyone plays, but I do enjoy a little bit of extra control over where I place things, how they fit in. It would be nice to just, maybe shift buildings closer to one another. Anyways, I did like a whole video on mods that I thought would be helpful, and I'm still eager to see if we get some of those in our gameplay and to see how that adds to what we're able to do. And of course, you're just gonna have some blocks that are just pretty large clusters of buildings, hopefully. The ultimate thing, again, will be just to see if the buildings kind of match up in terms of the height and the progression that we want as we enter further into the downtown area from some of the outer sides. There were some blocks that I set up that just don't really look great, and I don't love it when some of the low density commercial is butted up with either more low density commercial or just residential, where it's just kind of adhering to whatever road it wants. So I'm going to add some alleyways and break up some of this so it looks a little bit more interesting and hopefully feels a little bit more realistic in the process to some degree. It's going to take dezoning and clearing out some of these buildings, but adding alleyways and again some pedestrian paths or something like that can help break up some of this. And of course you do have trees at your disposal, and that's something else that I'll probably go in is add just by hand, add some trees into some of these blocks to help break up some things if I leave the appropriate zoning space for those trees. It's just so easy with city builders, right? To get in this habit of just laying everything out, throwing down the zones, filling up blocks. And that's good, I think, at the early stages of building your city. You can kind of get that jump start, get things moving, especially as you work through your milestones. But the more I play Cities 2, the more I'm starting to really slow down a lot of that progression and really look at what I'm doing a little bit more clearly, especially now that I have some experience in later game assets, like what all is there for me to utilize and bend and fit in a way that makes the city aesthetically pleasing and interesting, and also to some degree maybe realistic. And I found a reasonable amount of success when I go and break up some of the zones, add some alleyways, pedestrian paths. Those are just easy fixes, I think, that I've talked about a couple of times now, just to make some of your blocks just stand out a little bit and be something different than just a block of zoning. So something else we've been trying to work on is giving our riverfront a little bit more purpose with some pedestrian paths and roadways with some of the fill beneath it, especially to make that seawall that runs across a good portion of our riverfront. And I need to figure this out for this side of the river where the terrain is slowly going downward with the river, which always presents its own problems. But what I want to do is set up two tiers here. So we're gonna have a lower road that actually isn't the seawall anymore. It's just gonna be a road running kind of just above the water on a lower piece of terrain. And then I'm thinking about actually doing a fill wall at a road that is a slightly higher elevation. And then maybe we could have some pathing in here, close to the road, closer to the water. So it's almost like you can come down, park, take a bike ride or something like that. Well, I guess when we have bikes, you could take a bike ride, and that would be kind of the purpose of having this space beneath. Otherwise, it's just going to be a long slope, and I want to fill the space somehow. Part of me using these fill roads is to condense some of the space used by the terrain change. If I do that, then I can put buildings a little bit closer to certain areas, tighter together, and really give the impression of a downtown. The only problem is since we're primarily reliant on zoning to create the buildings we need to add density, vertically at least, it becomes a little bit tricky, right? Because I do want this area to feel dense. With ploppable buildings, I'm able to angle them and I'm able to fit them into certain areas that otherwise may be rather difficult. And sometimes setting up these blocks, especially when they're uneven, gives me a little bit of pause because I have to figure out how to zone them, right? And create the density or kind of what we want it to look like via the zoning, but it's a little bit of a challenge at times. So I'm going to even up some of these roads, and we have to decide whether we want anything more near the coastline on the lower level road. I do feel like that at some point should elevate and meet some of the other roads at a different height, and we'll have to kind of consider how that's going to work as we progress. Like, I've talked about the highway actually cutting through here. Maybe the highway could be a good excuse to shift the terrain a little bit and have a lower area of the city closer to downriver as like the direction we're going. I wonder if that might be an option. I guess we'll see as we progress, but I'm trying to think of what we do to fill the space so it still feels dense, but also kind of has some purpose beyond just being a road close to water, right? So I've got the lower road fixed. I'm going to go ahead and add some pedestrian pathing, at least as a placeholder to build off of later. I'm still not sure exactly what the design is going to look like down here, but I think something to create a little bit of a walking trail down to the lower level would be nice. I've been playing with pedestrian paths a lot, trying to find opportunities to include them in different areas where maybe I normally wouldn't. And I'm so torn on how I feel about them because on one hand, they seem very easy. It's like easy to do geometric things. But when you start doing curves and you start incorporating that to different roads and the angles that it chooses sometimes to actually function is just a little bit odd. And I've been trying to work around that and find ways of doing it. And sometimes you get the overlap indicator when you're doing something, and hopefully something like an anarchy mod would fix a lot of the difficulties you might have when blending some of these things together. Either that or some ability to alter the nodes in segments, you know, something like maybe move it if it has that functionality built in like it does in CS1. So moving forward, after we get this last little bit in place for the pathing, we're going to jump to actually building some suburbs, which is sort of what this video was supposed to be focused on, but I felt like we had to do some work in order to get where I wanted to be, to feel more comfortable of adding these. And what we're going to be setting up is a suburb or two north of the highway. So it's going to be above the highway system that we've been working on off and on through some of these episodes. And we're going to do probably multiple different subdivisions over here. And that is going to be a little bit of the barrier between the highway and whatever is on this side of the highway. So something that I've seen folks doing, including Canadian Moose Plays and some others, is actually utilizing alleyways as sort of suburban roads. And what's interesting about that is they don't have sidewalks. So they're a little bit more narrow, they're smaller, but they sort of fit in a way. And what's cool is if you add pedestrian pathing on some of these roads, you start to get this like offset sidewalk from the road itself. And I think it sets apart some of your suburbs if you do this. So this area is going to be parallel with the roads already running in place. Closer to this main road opposite of the highway, we're going to set up some commercial buildings, maybe a couple offices. And then on the alleyway roads, I'm going to set up some houses, and I'm going to use specific lot sizes. I'm actually going to draw these out versus just zoning the whole thing. Part of that is so that I can add my own trees in between some of these buildings. Like birch usually fits fairly well in just a 1 unit gap. And then on some of the pathing that's already set up with these roads, I'm going to set up pedestrian paths that complement the road and again look like an offset sidewalk. So by setting up the lot sizes specific to what I'm looking for, we can actually help battle some of the issues with high rent because it's got a smaller footprint. I think I've heard that there's a size that you can use that really does a good job of offsetting some of the high rent costs. I don't know if it's 2x3 or something along those lines. I'm just going to set these up in kind of the format like a 3x5 in this area, but you can always fluctuate depending on the suburb or what you're looking to do. In another city, for example, I was setting up areas of like 2x3, 2x4, I think, in some spaces, and that looked fine. And it starts to offer variety when you're looking across your city. So some of these houses are going to be less as deep as we shift closer to the highway, and we can pack more houses into this area. So there's going to be a little bit of variety in what's set up here. And I can just de-zone the block if I need to, but I'm not really intending on putting a big block of residential down without some breaks, like 1 unit breaks between the houses. So the pedestrian pathing is going to be laid down at the end of each street and go to the main road. Then I'm going to actually get rid of some of the crosswalks to not interfere too much with traffic, at least anywhere where I think it might actually interfere. But this is sort of what you're setting up. And again, it kind of sets itself off a little bit and stands out. I like it. It's just an alternative way. Instead of just zoning big blocks of houses, you could do something like this and have a little bit more control over the environment. So obviously earlier we were getting rid of some of the residential in town, and we're going to slowly upgrade that. So you're not going to see a giant population shift to this area, but hopefully this will add like a little bit of variety in some of the traffic as well. Like we'll see folks coming into town on some of these new roads we've built. I can also see that this is actually removing some of the traffic heading into town on our interchange that we worked on because they're actually going around utilizing the road close to the suburbs and then into the town on the other side. So maybe there is an actual benefit there as well. But I think you can also mix in a few different things on this main road. We can include an area of row homes. We could also do some offices or some commercial space just to help break up the monotony of houses and also have places for them to shop and get goods or go to work. So I set up these angled roads, which took me a little bit longer than I'd like to admit. Obviously, we have some pathing that I'm going to use to actually cut out some of these zones, and they'll be there obviously because of the suburb design idea, but I want to put these in because it's going to change up the zoning for the angled roads that I'm actually going to have houses on. And of course, these angled roads are really meant to just switch up some of the design that I have on the next street, right? Where we did a little bit more parallel with the roads that are there. Now I'm matching the overpass road to give us just some variety. Additionally, it should hopefully set itself apart a little bit when you zoom out later. It's going to look different than some of the other stuff we've set up. I can also use roundabouts at the end of some of these roads to create almost little cul-de-sacs. So I think this will look relatively nice. I'm going to follow the same pattern with setting up these lots, right? They're going to be smaller and a little bit more planned. And then later we can go back in, add trees, and try to fill the area up to make it look a little more dense than it probably is or should be. So now that we have these set up and we have the buildings actually growing within them, we're going to go ahead and throw some trees in here to fill it up a little bit. Again, birch fits in tighter spaces than something like an oak tree. And typically, because I don't have the ability to select multiple different trees, I'm going in with these tree brushes and picking, you know, oak, birch, maybe a spruce here and there, something along those lines to fill in space. And I'm trying to keep that consistent across the map. I also want a decent amount of trees between the highway and the suburbs. I want to make sure there's a little bit of a sound barrier there. Obviously, we could go add a wall at some point if we wanted to. That may be something I do depending on how this starts to fill up and what it looks like. Now, in the absence of being able to do a cul-de-sac, I'm going to include the small roundabouts at some of the ends of these roads just to make it look, you know, like you have that cul-de-sac feel. And you have to be careful where you zone and how close you zone to the cul-de-sac itself or the roundabout, because it will delete some of your houses. It's probably something I should have did before I set up the houses, but it'll be okay. Something we talked a lot about in our last episode was really trying to focus on adding character and making some areas stand out, but also giving each city a little bit of their own something. And I think adding suburbs and taking a little bit extra time to do this in a certain way, you know, with the sidewalks added, with the specifically spaced housing and all that jazz, I think just gives it a bit more personality, and they set themselves up to be something different than just zoning an entirety of a block, because that tends to look less interesting. And that's a very common way of just utilizing the zoning tool. So there's one more piece that I want to add here, and that is a college. I want to go and get the college added because it's going to help later with some of our zoning demand, right? We want to balance that, and education is a big factor. Now, it's easy just to drop a college on a main road, but again, we're going to take a little more time and we're going to try to set up a small campus. This is going to be something that we're going to expand a little bit later when we add a university, although I just want to be careful with our budget. On stream the other day, I took some time and actually built what I think is probably one of the better looking campuses that I've designed, utilizing just base game assets for Cities 2. And some of that came in with using some of the modular buildings multiple times around the campus just to add some density. It also relied on using the college and university to create a bigger campus, kind of combining those two to create a bigger campus. And then not to mention, I also used the city hall and the bank and featured those in the campus as well, along with plenty of pedestrian pathing, parking lots, and some of the sports fields to give us like a little bit of an athletic complex to the university campus. So essentially, we're just setting this up for now, a little bit of a placeholder, but also just to start getting the education up for folks, because again, it'll help with demand and balancing demand later. And as you can see, I have room to place these smaller modular buildings on the ends, again, beefing up what's here. And then hopefully we'll be in a position soon to add the university to this campus and really build out something that's rather unique for the city. I'm also going to make one more change to the suburb here. I'm actually going to extend it a little bit further. I do like the 2 pedestrian paths on that lower road as well. I think that looks nice. And then we'll have maybe some row housing or something like that on the main road. And that'll all end up being across the street from the campus. So I think this area will look pretty good once it's all said and done. I've primarily been surrounding my colleges with a lot of residential, whether it be houses or row homes or something along those lines. And it looks fine. It looks good. I wish we had something along the lines of dorms to put in, or just apartment complexes that weren't, you know, just medium density buildings. Just some more variety, and that would be nice. But hopefully once we get some assets, we'll be able to do that. And speaking of which, I wonder when we're going to get assets, because I'm kind of ready. I know the game hasn't been out that long, but I want a little bit more control. I'm tempted to dive into the dev build of the game and see what that lends itself to. Obviously, that's utilizing the same assets that already exist, but I wonder with that ability to plop them down and that control, I kind of want to see what that's like. So I don't know if you guys have tried it. Let me know, obviously, if you have, and what your thoughts are. It seems like it's unstable, but there are ways to improve stability in terms of what you're doing, it seems. Now, keep in mind that the Cedarburg series is meant to be a little bit more of a let's play. It's kind of play along, and we talk about different things we're learning and how we're setting up different areas of the city. And I still hope to do more tutorial-based or informational-based videos. It's just taking a little time for me to find what those subjects are. I have a couple of ideas. I am working on some more things that are more educational beyond just what we're doing here in Cedarburg. So it's a little bit of both. This is a much more casual series that I can kind of keep up with and keep posting on the page, but there are some things that I'm thinking about adding into the rotation in terms of educational content. Those are typically just one-offs, right? Like I do a video on a specific subject and then, you know, we move on to the next subject down the road. But This is meant to be a little bit more continuous. But with that, we've set up a couple of suburbs, we got our college in, and we made some changes into the downtown area that I think are going to pay off later. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode and you found something at least useful to incorporate into your build. So thank you all for watching. Be sure to hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Leave a like, drop a comment down below with any thoughts or suggestions you have for future videos, and I will see you all next time.